Should we be traditional? Should we be charismatic? Should we be charismatic? Let's chat about this. I think in reflecting on this, one of the spirits of the age is that the enemy seeks to provide false dichotomies in the life of the church. That means like an either or, but never a both. So for example, sometimes you'll hear like people ask you the question, are you a traditional Catholic or a charismatic Catholic? As if you couldn't be both. Do you like praying traditional prayers or do you like praying in tongues? As if it was an either or and not both. Are you a care for the poor type of Catholic, or are you like a daily mass type of Catholic? As if the two are mutually exclusive but can never be together. That's a false dichotomy, and that's from our old enemy and foe, the devil. So let's try to avoid that. So, to be a bold claim here, to be Catholic means to be deeply rooted in tradition and to be traditional, and to be radically available to the Holy Spirit. And that's the charismatic. We cannot separate these two things. Where did the church begin? I like to think it began at Pentecost, in the upper room. But what happened in the upper room? Two main elements. The Eucharist, where Jesus said, "This is my body, do this in remembrance of me." That's the tradition. That's the living tradition of the church. And the second, of Pentecost, is the radical unleashing of the power of the Holy Spirit on the apostles and the Blessed Mother. It was the unction of the Holy Spirit that produced the love of God through the charismatic element of the church. So to be Catholic means to be deeply rooted in tradition and to be radically available to the Holy Spirit. It can never be an either or. It's always a both and. So the question might be, how do you and I walk on a tightrope or a slack line? Do you lean to the right or to the left? Yes, you lean both ways. That's how you walk. But how do we fall? We usually fall off a slack line when we lean to one side to the exclusion of the other. And so notice what happens for like a traditional-minded Catholic. We all want to be traditional-minded and to be traditional. But what happens when a traditional-minded Catholic starts to exclude the charismatic element of being Catholic? Well, we become traddy. And sometimes traddy, or the traditional movement, can become too influenced and fascinated by the trappings of Catholicism. They're good things, but they're external things. The sights and the smells and the bells and the Latin, those are good things. Those are part of the tradition. We must love them. But to the exclusion of the charismatic, we become so fascinated and fixated that we become just reduced to the externals and the trappings. So, what happens on the charismatic leaning person that leans a little too much on that side to the exclusion of the traditional? Well, we become kind of weird and kind of crazy. We become unhinged from the traditional roots of what makes us who we are. So to be traditional keeps us in the reminder of who am I? So this is why we shouldn't be afraid of Latin. We shouldn't be afraid of Gregorian chant. We shouldn't be afraid of traditional prayers. It keeps us in the living tradition of the passing on of the authentic faith. So we must actually have both. I like to think that everyone thinks themselves as a very balanced, middle-of-the-road person. But are we humble enough to acknowledge where we tend to lean to the extreme or of shirking the other side? God is actually calling us to live both in a beautiful, harmonious way. So a couple final like do's and don'ts. One, maybe don't. We should try to avoid an adjective-based Catholicism. Well, I'm a traditional Catholic. Well, I'm a charismatic Catholic. Well, you're a liberal Catholic. Well, you're a conservative Catholic. The only adjectives we're really allowed to use are one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church. We're a unity. We must be. And so to try to avoid kind of like this flavor that starts to define me, that I put as an adjective before my Catholic faith, I really think we should try to avoid that and just be simply and purely and beautifully Catholic. Second and last thing, we should try to avoid letting our preferences, our personal preferences, become our pitfalls. So the church actually gives us a lot of bandwidth to have preferences, to prefer this prayer over that. We shouldn't let our preferences, though, become our ultimate pitfalls. And so this especially happens when we start getting into this either-or type mentality. The church gives us a lot of flexibility and freedom, so let's not let our personal preference for either the ordinary form give us an anger or hatred for the extraordinary, or those who love the extraordinary form to think that the ordinary form is invalid or subpar. We shouldn't let our personal preference, which is not the preference of the church, be a pitfall to our ultimate downfall. So hopefully this lends us a freedom to live in the authentic spirit of simply being beautifully Catholic, being both traditionally minded and deeply available to the power of the Holy Spirit. God bless you.